We're in the Gospel of Mark, and we're going to be in Mark 11. And so, I'm a lot like you guys. I like action flicks, I like movies. And one of my favorite series is the Die Hard series with Bruce Willis. And in the fourth movie, it's Live Free or Die Hard. There's a scene in there where Bruce Willis' job is to protect his kids, sort of like a hacker. He's got to protect them. And so they are running away from the bad guys who have hacked the government. They've hacked all the signals and things like that, and they're stuck in a tunnel. And so what the hackers have done is they're going to force them out to the to see the helicopter that's got a sniper waiting for them. So what they've done is they turn all the traffic signals so that all the cars start coming in from the other side of the tunnel. And so they have to turn around in their police car. And so he pushes the kid out, and he starts driving toward the helicopter, and then he jumps out of the car, and then the car skips over the toll booth and crashes into the helicopter. A huge collision. You're sitting there with your mouth gaping open. You're like, did he just do what I saw what he did? And the kid said, did you just hit that helicopter with your car? And Bruce Willis turned around and said, yeah, I ran out of bullets. Okay? That was a huge collision. And that's the kind of collision that we're going to be talking about today. A collision of two different kingdoms. The Gospel of Mark is short and sweet. It's straight to the point. It's only 16 chapters long. If you bring it into this century, it's like the text message of the Gospels. Okay? If you want detail, then let's go to Luke. If you want to see Jesus' nobility, then we'll go to Matthew. And if you want to see Jesus' deity, then you'll study John. For Mark, we begin with the ministries of John and Jesus. And John's ministry is short and sweet. A couple of verses, and then we get right into Jesus. There's this phrase that's constantly repeated throughout. It's almost like a rhyme, almost. It's the Greek word hodos. It's on the way. Mark constantly says, while they were on their way, he was on his way, they were on their way. You kind of get this idea. Something is moving. The book moves, okay? It's not one of those, oh, let's have a seat. This is one of those, while they were on the way, there's this urgency, this pushing, and it's pushing, and it's pushing on the way. They were moving. Where would they be on their way to? The cross, right? There's this constant pushing on their way. Okay? John prepares the way. Jesus is the way, right? And so at the end of Mark, he leaves us with a decision. And we'll talk about this decision in a minute. But he leaves us with this decision. Are you going to follow the way, or are you going to follow another way? Okay? So I want to paint a background picture first. I want to kind of give you a little bit of temperature of what's going on in Jesus' day, what's been building up to this point. And so Palestine is conquered by Alexander. And what does Alexander do? He wants to import the Greek religion, the Greek culture, Greek life into every place that he conquers. This is a good thing because it's through the Greek language that we have our Gospels. And that people in Italy and Asia and all those places can understand and hear the Gospel because they're hearing it in what? In the Greek language, okay? So it's not all bad. So Greek becomes the main language of commerce. After much turmoil, the Romans come in. General Pompey finally conquers Palestine in 63 BC. So the Romans have come in. All right, so Roman rule is finally solidified with Herod the Great becoming the chosen vassal ruler by Caesar Augustus. Okay, so we've got Herod the Great. We remember Jesus' birth story with Herod the Great. All right, so common language of the day. Since it was the Roman peace, Pax Romana, that Caesar's announcements would always be called the good news. Hear the good news, they would announce, okay? So hearing the good news would be a common phrase of those days. So when we hear the good news of the gospel, and they have the good news of Caesar, it's almost like the road was paved. for the good news of the gospel. Okay? Christos, or the Christ, means anointed one. That was a term that Caesar was often referred to himself, that he was the anointed one, the Christ. Okay? Julius Caesar was deified as being a god. Augustus was the son of God. Okay? Been very familiar with this language. Okay? The Gospels, through Revelation, were subversive documents. They were using names that we already knew. Well, the good news. Well, the good news of what? The news of the gospel. These are subversive documents, okay? They would pass right underneath, almost like written in code. Passed right underneath Nero's nose. So we have the language, we have the Palestinian background that it's very volatile. The Pharisees saw Romans as the oppressors. Okay? They believed and followed the oral law and the written law. The oral law was a hedge of protection around the written law. They believed that the reason they went into exile way back in the days of Nehemiah and Ezra and Esther and all that stuff is because they violated the Ten Commandments. Not really why, but that's what they said was why, because they violated their covenant with God. They felt like if they violated the Ten Commandments, so what are we going to do? We're going to put a barrier around the Ten Commandments so that it never happen again. So they created all these extra laws. 613 to be exact. That's a lot of rules to follow. They also believed that if everybody in Israel could follow all 613 laws just for one day, the Messiah would come. So when this guy comes along and says that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, when he comes along and he heals people at the pool of Solomon, and he begins to heal people who are in their beds on the Sabbath. What does this do to the Pharisees? Well, their plan gets shot, right? If we got this guy running around here doing these things, keeping people from following our laws, the Messiah will never come, right? That's how they thought of it. They also resisted any kind of Roman or Greek life. They wanted to be pure Jews, okay? Other notable things that happened during those days. In around 6 to 8 AD, there was this huge revolt led by Judas the Galilean. He began to preach that we cannot pay tribute to Caesar. And he began to start a riot. He began to start kind of this organized group. Sort of sounds familiar like today's headlines, doesn't it? And they wanted to fight back against it. So he preached rising against Rome. Well, Rome wasn't going to have any of that. So the 10th Legion came in from Syria and crushed the rebellion. Almost like a Star Wars, right? Crushed the rebellion. He crushed the rebellion by crucifying 2,000 people on the road from Galilee to Jerusalem. Around the same time, a young man was traveling with his parents to offer sacrifice in the temple. He was about 12. And his mother Mary and his father Joseph took him to the temple. Could you imagine? 2,000 posts along the way, sort of like the post between, or 191 between Odessa and Midland. And all along the road, 2,000 crucifixions. Scary sight. Especially, as an adult, much less 12 years old. You really get the idea of who was in charge, who was in control. So Palestine is a tinderbox where the least little spark could start trouble. So with all that kind of in the background, let's take a look at chapter 11 in Mark. So it says, as they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go into the village ahead of you, and just as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you doing this?' tell them, 'The Lord needs it, and he will send it back here shortly.'" They went and found the colt outside in the street, and tied at a doorway. As they untied it, some people standing there asked, "What are you doing, untying that colt?" And they answered as Jesus told them to, "The Lord needs it and will return it." And the people let them go. When they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks over it, he sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread branches they had cut in the fields. Those who were ahead, those who followed and shouted, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest." I always think of Michael W. Smith's song. Blessed be the name of the Lord, all that. Just Hosanna, Hosanna. That's where we got it from, right? Jesus entered Jerusalem and went to the temple. He looked around at everything, but since he was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. So you had this huge crowd. John tells us that in chapter 12, that the crowd that saw Jesus raise Lazarus from the dead is there. They know who Jesus is. They're waiting to see, what's he going to do next? All right, in a little bitty town outside, he raised a guy from the dead. Let's see what happens in Jerusalem. Man, this is good. So, crowd mentality. We begin to get caught up in the excitement of what's going on. Jerusalem had already been bursting at the seams because people were coming in for Passover. People like to come in for a week, hospitality. They come in early, and begin to get hotel rooms, and, hang out with family, start filling up the place. So the place would have been swollen with people. And you had this group coming in with Hosanna, blessed be the name of the Lord. And you got all these people there, and it's bustling and hustling through the streets. The streets are small. They're not big streets like ours. They're small streets. So people's crawling over. Just think of an anthill, okay? People are just crawling all over everybody, They're trying to push their way through to where they're getting good. There's all this excitement. And cloaks are being thrown at. Palm branches everywhere. There's all this excitement. And then we get to verse 11. Jesus enters Jerusalem, went to the temple. He looks around at everything, and since it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. Look down. Where's the show? What was going to happen? All this stuff, and then there's just that. Just kind of leaves it hanging. Now, Hosanna means save now. It was considered a praise. We consider a praise today. It actually comes from a psalm. Okay? The story is important. It's found in all four Gospels. If it's found in all four Gospels, it's telling us something. That this is a pivotal point. This is something important. In the ancient Near East, you might think, he's riding a donkey. Have you heard of a donkey? It's hee-hawing all the way. They're yanking and pulling. The guy in the back is pushing the thing up. A donkey of all things. Why not a horse? That's the stubborn donkey. Okay? Well, in the ancient Near East, it was their tradition that the king rode the donkey. Jesus is making a claim here. He's making a claim of being the king. By riding the donkey, he was the king of his people. What makes it even more important is Jerusalem. During the Passover time, in this manner, it gave the image of messianic expectation. Here comes the Messiah. Maybe that's what really ticked the Pharisees off, because they knew what this meant. They know all the verses. They know all the prophecy. Here comes Jesus, of all things. How absurd. This person from Nazareth, riding in, this Galilean, coming in, riding on a donkey. During Passover of all time. How absurd. Jesus was claiming to be the Messiah. Now, Old Testament horses were used for war. Okay? Horses also kind of signify human pride in the Old Testament. The donkey gives an image of humility. This is an image of what kind of kingdom Jesus is going to have. What does he say? Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who are humble. Now, along the same time, we still got a week to Passover. Along the same time, there's other things going on that the Bible really doesn't describe because it doesn't really add to the point. But about this time, our friend Pilate, he rules this area for about 10 years, from 26 AD to 36 AD. Our friend Pilate knows that Jerusalem is beginning to swell. He knows Passover is coming. He's been here for a while. He knows. So he's got to prep for it. And what are the Romans? Crowd control. They got to keep the peace. Remember that tinderbox I was telling you about? All those zealots, uprisings? They got to keep it under control. Friends, doesn't that sound a lot like today? Can we name a couple of cities? Sounds like a lot like today. So he's got to keep things under control. Now, Pilate doesn't live in Jerusalem. For some reason, we always think Pilate stays in Jerusalem. He doesn't want to stay there. He's got a nice place just about a few days' ride on the ocean. The San Diego, the Near East, Caesarea Philippi, man. Cool ocean winds. It's not dusty. He can go swimming anytime he wants. He's got a place up there super nice, but he's got to come down to Jerusalem to keep things under control. So imagine that train wreck, okay, coming in like the old movies. Here comes one train. And they flash to the other train, right? And then we're going to flash to this one. Here comes another. They keep getting closer and they keep getting faster. Here comes Jesus. And maybe right? And here comes Pilate on his horse, coming in for one side. Here comes Jesus. Mark's painting us a picture here. What do we see? Jesus is in the kingdom of this world, right? About to come clash. Come in. Next slide, sir. All right. So we have two kingdoms coming in conflict. One of the kingdom of the heart, one of humility. The other one's the kingdom of this world of pride. We have Caesar, the good news of Caesar. Christ, the good news of Christ. Sovereignty. Caesar manifests the presence of God among all his subjects. He's considered God with us. Jesus manifests the presence of God. He's God with us, Emmanuel. Now, the agency. Emperor and empire anointed and manifest divine will, the blessings. Everything comes from Caesar. Right? Let Caesar show his favor to you. The government gives you, provides for you, takes care of you. Jesus is the anointed and the commission to manifest divine will to people. You are blessed by God. How about the next slide? Societal well-being. This empire and emperor's responsibility to take care of it. Jesus and his kingdom is responsible for you. Two kingdoms clashing together. Roman peace for the wealthy, ruling elite, preserved by military might and taxation, compared to the peace of Christ. Upside down kingdom characterized by everybody's equal. There's no Jew, Greek, Gentile. All are the same in God's eyes. We are all equal and equally loved. It's a kingdom for the rest of the people, not the higher-ups, not the elites. I'm not saying it can't be Christian, I'm just saying that it turns the world upside down. And look at the last one. Caesar's symbol is the sword. What's Jesus' symbol? The towel and the cross. Let's keep moving. So, we have these two kingdoms in conflict. But there's still more that's going on. Not just with the outside, how about the inside? Two things going on the inside. Let's take a look at verse 11. So Jesus enters, comes in, he looks around, nothing happens. And then verse 12. The next day, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. And seeing in the distance a fig tree and leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing, not leaves, because it was not the season for figs. Then he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard him say it. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple area and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, "Is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations? But you have made it a den of robbers." The chief priests and the teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him, because the whole crowd was amazed at his teaching. When the evening came, they went out of the city. In the morning, as they went along, they saw a fig tree withered from the roots. Peter remembered and said to Jesus, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered." So he goes in, verse 11, and he comes in, and he just looks around the temple, and you're thinking, okay, that's weird. Big celebration, and then he comes in and takes a look. What's he looking at in the temple? What's he checking for? He's looking to see if everything is working as it should. Remember this, Passover time. Okay? Are things being prepared? Are things going like they're supposed to? And what does he see? He sees the money changers being set up, everybody setting up their tables. It's like a flea market out there. Animals are being herded in to these spots, putting up little cages. They're all prepping for that. So verse 12 through 14 is a very odd part of the story. Here comes this fig tree sticking out like a sore thumb. In the middle of this story, here's the fig tree. What's that all about? That's a weird spot. But have you ever read a book or watched a movie that there's some foreshadowing or metaphor? One of the guys I like is M. Night Shyamalan. I like his movies because he always gives you a twist. All right? He does Sixth Sense. Okay? He does that one, and where the whole time you don't realize that, hopefully this doesn't spoil it for you, but Bruce Willis, who's his companion, is dead. Died of a gunshot wound. Or The Village, another good one by M. Night Shyamalan, where you think these people are living in the 1860s or 1880s. They're wearing old-timey clothes, there's no technology, until somebody gets shot. And then they got to get penicillin. And his blind daughter, is sent on a mission, and she comes over the fence. Come to find out, it's in today's world. The whole time, twist at the end. Okay? That's what's going on here. He's foreshadowing something to us. He's giving us a metaphor of what's going on with the temple. So the fig tree is in leaf, but it's out of season. It's advertising something that it doesn't have. It's saying, look at me, but it doesn't have any fruit. So what's that image? The image is hypocrisy. It's pretending to be something that it's not. The temple is pretending to be something that it's not. Let's see if we get some more clues. in verses 15 through 21. This is the second time that Jesus has run the money changers and those buying and selling things out of the temple courtyard. First time was in John 2. It's the fleecing of the people that Jesus is upset about. So I have a slide for you. Oh yeah, I can read that. Okay, so fleecing of the people. All right, in Jesus' day, archaeology shows that there were bathhouses all in Jerusalem around the temple. The priest and the high priest owned these things. Their rules say that in order for you to come into the temple and offer your sacrifices, you can't come off the dirty road. That's disgusting. You need to go get a shower. So they have bathhouses. But you know what? Water ain't free. This is sort of like a desert. Water ain't free. So you got to pay. So they make people pay to take a shower before you come. Well, that ain't enough. Money exchange. You can't pay Roman coins for your temple tax. You've got to pay in Jewish coins, temple money. But you know what? Life ain't free. You'll pay the exchange rate. You know, gotta give a little to give a little. So there's an exchange done, so you make a little money off of that. Well, that ain't enough. Guess what? You don't have to come with an animal. We'll provide everything for you. Here's your sacrificial animal. Is that what the law called for? No. The law called for that you were to pick something out of your own flock that the Lord provided, and it had to mean something to you. Would it mean something to this guy? No. But you know what? We can provide that for you. But we'll provide it for the right price. So these guys were fleecing the people left and right. What a blatant disregard for God's law. And so, in verse 17, he gives us one last key point. He says, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers. At the temple site, the actual temple building was used by the priests. It contained the, you see the big part here. It looks like it's got spiky here. This part right here. That's the Holy of Holies. That's where the altar of incense was. That's where the priests went in and did their thing. Okay? So they have that one. Right out in front is the porch. Right out front here, this big building here. That's where the priests hung out, and they grabbed your sacrifice, and they put it in line with everybody else's, and they would offer things like that. They would offer the sacrifice right out there on the altar of sacrificial altar. Also, inside the area where that big area is, you see a gate right here. See this gate? Okay. Well, guess what? Only men were allowed to pass through that gate. So, the men get to hang out up here with the priest all around this area here. Okay, this area right here, this is where the women and kids of Jewish women and kids got to go. That's where they stayed. That's also where they took temple money, okay, as they passed through. And then you have all this area out here. You'll see it all surrounded, all the way around up here, okay? You see all the way up there. That's the court of Gentiles. Okay, that's where people like you and me are supposed to go. If we're God-fearers, that's where we're supposed to go and worship God. But guess what? There's no room for us. That's where all the animals were kept. That's where the people were exchanging money and doing exchanging animals. That was where business was done. And it crowded us out. Why would Jesus say, my house will be a house of prayer for all nations? But we were being crowded out. It wasn't enough for these guys to make money on the showers and to make money on the temple. Now they had to make money, and then they were crowding us out. So the fleecing of the people didn't have to be done there, but it was. Their greed, their disrespect for God's house. They're holier than thou. They're God's people. that attitude was crowding out the Gentiles. So we've had the fig tree, and it's withered from the roots. It doesn't wither. You know, trees and plants and stuff, they usually wither from what? The outer edges, right? They wither in like this. This thing was withered from the roots up. The complete opposite way. Mark is making a comparison here. This is a big seminary word. It's called an accusio. It means it's just included by itself, this little thing. It's like an Oreo cookie. You have a beginning and an end and all that juicy stuff in the middle. Okay? This is a little thing. It's telling us something. That the leaves of the fig tree signify the ritual and the robes and the sacrifices of the temple. Priests are not doing what they're advertising. Instead of actually sacrificing things and it being about the remission of sins and about their covenant to God, it has become a business. The business of church. The metaphor, temple worship, is not what it's supposed to be. And it dies just like the fig tree. She's like, oh, all right, Mr. Glass, all right, Andy. That's cool and everything, but what about today? Do you know there are churches out there? I was reading about one, Presbyterian USA Church. Now they're more liberal spectrum of the Presbyterian Church, but the pastor doesn't even believe in God. And he allows his parishioners to find God in their own way. And there are more of those out there than we like to think. There's another story where I was reading, it's from Glenn Beck, about a nun who is working with the people in Iraq. They had to flee their home because of ISIS. But the amazing thing about this interview is that she says, and this is so promising, she says, I could not get into the U.S. They would not approve my visa. She says, but let me tell you something that you're not going to hear on the news, that the people of ISIS are afraid. They have never encountered people who are so sold out to God, they won't pay the tax to Allah or to ISIS. They will defy Allah and preach Christ, and they will not deny Christ. And they will be tortured and killed. But they stand firm. And the people of ISIS are afraid. It's amazing. What a contrast. Two contrasts in that story. One is she has all the paperwork saying that she will come back to Iraq. She's committed there. She's working with the Catholic Church. So she's committed to going back. That's where she's working. She has other paperwork that says that she's going to go back. But they won't give her a visa to get in to talk to the Senate. Because she's supposed to be interviewed and testify to the Senate. Which is ironic because the government doesn't seem to care about who comes up from our southern borders. Maybe they should fly her to Mexico and let her come up on her own. Another ironic thing about that is that these people face death and torture and have nothing. She lives in a little box, container box. You know those containers that go on a ship, the big square ones? She's living out of that. A lot of people are living out of that. It's hot in the summer and cold in the winter. And we in America are afraid to stand on God's word and confront the 1% that challenges us about the homosexual agenda. We are scared to be called bigots. We're scared to be called old-fashioned, archaic, or ignorant. We are scared of them. Where are okay, back up. Jesus, we follow Jesus. We're his disciples. We do as he does, right? Where are the people who are flipping over the money changing tables? Where are the people who are willing to knock over the benches? And I'm not talking about violence, but I'm talking about standing up and saying no more. I follow this young lady, her name's Melissa. She's a baker up in Oregon who didn't want to make the cake for the homosexual couple. And the state fined her $135,000. And I don't know about you, but I can't write a check for that right now. That would crush us financially. Wouldn't it crush all of us financially? You have to pay this by Friday. Where are we going to get that kind of money? We want to glorify all these people that are dying. You know, we want to glorify this kind of persecution. Or we say, let's stood up in front of somebody and, you know, we persecute ourselves sometimes. It's not persecution. There comes a time we're going to have to stand up for what is right, not what is easy. Underneath Melissa's, she has a sweet cakes, that's her business, sweet cakes from Melissa. So underneath her Facebook thing, she was talking about things that were going on with finding stuff. There were some vile comments underneath there. And there was these comments that said, we should have just made it. Friends, I'm telling you, if we compromise at that point, it's a slippery slope. What else are we going to compromise? Now, I'm not saying that we can't be friends with homosexual couples. Okay? We want to reach them for God. We want to be their friends. Okay? And what I am saying is that when it comes time to take a stand, we're going to have to say it's going to be with Jesus or no one else. ISIS is afraid because of people standing firm in their faith. It's time that other people are afraid. No, I'm not talking about going on slashing tires or anything, okay? I'm just talking about when we begin to unite underneath Christ. It changes things. The power of prayer changes things. So Mark leaves us with this story. Watch out for those who look to be doing God's work, but they are not. So he leaves us with a decision. Are you going to follow the way, the truth, and the life? Or are you going to follow another way? Don't be like the tree that produces no fruit. Don't look like you're going to church. Sound like you're going to church. There's no fruit. Now, God has placed you in specific spots on purpose. You're working at where you work right now for a reason. You are going to school where you're at for a reason. Be his hands and feet. Be a positive influence for God